Welcome everyone, and before we proceed, I would like to introduce our presenter today. So please join me in welcoming Geoff to our webinar. Geoff Lawrence teaches English as a second language and applied linguistics at York University, which is in Toronto. Geoff is especially interested in exploring the potential of online, blended, and classroom-based English language teaching and teacher education. His research examines online and blended language teaching methodology, teacher beliefs towards educational innovation, and intercultural learning in language and teacher education. Well, thank you, Geoff, for accepting this invitation, and I will now pass over to you. But before, I will just pull up the slides.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Juliana, and thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks for coming on this Saturday in Toronto. I mean, we have amazing weather. So, and I know many of us have had such a long winter this year in Canada. So, thanks so much for attending on Saturday, and I'm really happy to be presenting some of my research and some of the findings that we've sort of had in this research on sort of technology integration into ESL. So what I'll do is I'll start presenting, and if you have questions, because we don't have a huge group, we can take your questions as you sort of as they arise as I go through this presentation. So if you have a question, please type it in the text box, and Juliana or I will sort of prompt that, and we'll try to address your questions as we go, and we'll also have some time at the end for questions. So what I'd like to talk about is really this call for sort of the human feel in these online spaces that we're increasingly using in language teaching environments. And what I will talk about is really the changing nature of our communication processes and the potential for language teaching. So we'll talk about the changing landscape in which we're working these days. And I'll share some research that we did analyzing the feasibility of ESL e-learning in Ontario. And that was a project that was funded by the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration. And I'll share some of those findings. And one of the main findings was that teachers, students, and administrators thought that we had to make these online spaces with a human feel and with that human element. And that sort of resulted in a lot of interest in blended programs where teachers and students can interact face-to-face, but they can also interact with online tools on their own and also so synchronously together. And I'll share some examples from a curriculum design team here in Ontario that worked on occupation-specific language training. And they're an interesting example because they did some curriculum development for online and blended programs very quickly and one after another. And I'll show the lessons they learned and how it really illustrated this need to have this human dimension in the online learning space. And then we'll share some strategies on sort of how we can humanize these online spaces, and then we'll take any questions. Okay, so welcome again, and I'll start, as I mentioned, by really talking about our increasingly technology-mediated world and the way we're communicating that is so different. And I went to this conference that is a great conference, a distance teaching and learning conference in Madison, Wisconsin, every year in August, and it wasn't related to language. It was related to technology-based teaching in a variety of content areas. But the speaker, Judy Brown, talked about sort of learning with mobile technology, and she gave us some stats. This was in 2012, so these stats are a little out of date, and you can probably guess how they've increased since then. But she gave us these stats on how technology is really becoming such a part of our life, and certainly mobile technology, and how that's really sort of integrated into our existence. And she gave the stats on smartphones, and she gave, an example from the Beijing 2008 Olympics to the London 2012 Olympics as a time frame. And it was really interesting and sort of quite surprising to see these numbers, even though, we understand they're happening, but to see them quantitatively, it was really quite an interesting realization. So she talked about smartphones, and how smartphones had sort of were like tripling and quadrupling in that period, how Facebook increased by tenfold over that period between 2008 2012 Facebook accounts, how Twitter, that was really just appearing in 2008, how now, as we know, it's really a main sort of social networking tool and communication tool that people are using and companies are using, etc. And tablets that really weren't on the scene in 2008, and as we know, how they're completely pervasive, and often they are people's primary computing device that we use versus laptops or desktops. And, the number of apps, sort of downloads that have occurred since then. And these are all these tools that we now see as quite normal and mainstream in certain environments. But they really are changing the way we're communicating and the way potentially that we can teach English and other languages. And she gave these stats that probably don't surprise you, and certainly any of you who have teenagers, that we U.S. Americans check our mobile devices approximately 150 times a day on average every 6.5 minutes. And really shows this incredible impact that information and communication technologies are having on society, workplace, and the way we're communicating, which is really, I think, impacting how we really need to work with language with our learners. So we'll come back to that point through the webinar. So I'm gonna really start by talking about this ministry-funded ESL e-learning feasibility study, and talk about the rationale behind it. And as you can see, part of the rationale is this realization that technology is so ever-present. But it was really also to see, in these adult non-credit ESL programs that Ontario funds. So these are community-based programs, not linked programs, but community-based programs that often are offered in linked learning environments. And the ministry wanted to see how ESL e-learning was feasible in these programs, and to really explore what was being done in other environments where technology was being integrated into ESL programs, and what did teachers, administrators, and learners see as their visions of how technology could potentially be used in these environments, and what would the challenges be to really help see whether this is something that the ministry could fund and could integrate more into these programs that were mainly offered face-to-face, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And they wanted to hear from these multiple perspectives. They wanted to hear from instructors, from learners, from administrators about this. So, as I mentioned, this research was funded by the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, and it was coordinated by the Toronto Catholic District School Board. And what we decided to do was done over a year in 2013, so last year, and we started off by doing a research report examining the benefits, limitations of ESL e-learning, and identifying some really effective practices across the country that were being done with technology in ESL environments. And we use that to inform our research that we did with 12 focus groups. And these were focus groups that we had with just administrators, another group with just instructors, another one with just learners in 4 different regions across Ontario, to try and give us a sense of how people were feeling about the integration of technology. So I'll share those findings in a moment. And then we use that data from the focus groups to really inform an Ontario-wide survey that we distributed to sort of over 300 participants in the spring and summer. And these were ESL learning providers across the province. And, I'll share this research, some of the findings that came out of this, because it was quite interesting. So we initially asked participants, how often do you use technology in your own sort of environment outside of language teaching and learning? And as you can appreciate, almost 100% of administrators and instructors said I use it every day. Not quite as many learners said I use it almost every day, but 96% is the vast majority. And what we found is that ESL e-learning was really highly varied in how technology was being integrated into these learning environments across Ontario. And it was really, not surprisingly, dependent on what infrastructure, technology infrastructure, training sort of background that these instructors and administrators had to work with in their sort of environments. And there was still what we found, a dominance of computer labs that were being used in these environments. So teachers would take their students into these computer labs outside of class for a few hours each week for work on software or work on, just using word processing, etc. And we found that there was a huge range in infrastructure in these sites across Ontario. And these quotes from these instructors was from the same focus group in the same region of Ontario that were like only 10 kilometers away from each other, where we had one site saying we're using really outdated desktops that were from the 1990s, and they were just gathering dust, and teachers hardly ever used them because they were so slow and just inadequate. And then the other site, we had, sort of instructors and administrators tell us that we have everything. We have smart boards, Wi-Fi, 2 networks, one for learners, one for instructors. So it really shows the variability that we teachers often have to work with in these environments, and how that does really shape how we use technology. But what we did find was there was really this overwhelming desire to change. Instructors, learners, and administrators felt that e-learning or technology-needed language teaching and learning would be useful in these programs. And we had a number of learners say, the way we're learning really feels sort of old-fashioned. It doesn't really resonate with me. Often, we had students who were in multi-level groups, which is no surprise in these community-based programs, where students said, the teacher's working on this, but it's not really relevant to me. And so I'm feeling impatient and that I'm not really I'm not learning what I need to learn. And these learners were, as you can imagine, newcomers, refugees, and individuals who really wanted their time used efficiently. So efficiency arose in this research among learners, and instructors also, realizing that I'm not getting to those learners because I have these ones that I really need to devote a lot of time with. So there was this realization from learners in that way. And what we found is that there were these challenges in connecting in these online environments. And we had learners saying, that, I'm scared of computers because I'm not comfortable. I really do like connecting with other students when I go to class, because often they're the first individuals I've met outside of my family when I arrive in Ontario that I can really communicate with and share sort of integration and transitioning experiences, talk about culture shock, talk about services that we can tap into, et cetera. But there, in the literature that we looked at, there really, as you can imagine, tends to be a high attrition rate in distance language learning programs. And what we found is that really the way we collaborate online, we have certain presumptions, certain expectations that are often based on our experience with these online spaces. So if I send an email to you, and, I'm used to getting emails back within a few hours. And if you don't respond to me within those few hours, then I may make a judgment about you based on my expectations that I don't explicitly share with you. And this is this idea that, this online collaboration is bound within these is actually frame communicative purposes and these expectations of how we build relationships that may be my expectations but not yours. So what we really realize is there is a need to negotiate new norms of online communication, that we need to really explicitly as teachers set ground rules and negotiate, why don't we do this and what do you feel about this, and check in with learners and make sure they're not feeling alienated or not feeling sort of outside, etc. And we really realized in the literature review that there is this ability for individuals to really express aspects of their identity that may be very different than the identities they express in class, face-to-face, which is the exciting part of online sort of teaching and learning. You know, so, and this quote that I have here, what I extremely hated, this is from a student who's in a wiki writing project that we had students in Toronto collaborate with students in Dubai and write an essay together with individuals they never met. And this is an example that this student in Toronto expected a certain speed of response, you know, and his partner in Dubai had a different sort of understanding of how I need to interact in these online spaces. And you can see his comment. What I extremely hated is that I have tried to connect my partner, but he did not respond. And this was this happened a number of times in this project. So it really does highlight the need to negotiate these new communicative norms in these online spaces. And what we found in this research is that really there was an overwhelming desire for blended learning. We did have some instructors, some administrators who never heard of blended learning. So, I mean, we can't make the presumption that people know what this is, and learners know what this is. So that was an interesting realization. But really there was, you know, when we explained it and when individuals shared that I really like blended learning models, that we found that there was this incredible overwhelming preference for this blended aspect. And, you know, no surprise, I'm sure that you understand that, you know, that it sort of pulls in the benefits of the best of both worlds. So we have this online sort of self-paced environment where we can collaborate at the same time and collaborate on our own time. And we also have the classroom space where we can connect as human beings, where we can build relationships, where we can share spontaneous interaction, etc., and network, you know, the way human beings have always networked through history. You know, we had instructors saying that a lot of our students feel isolated to begin with. And if you start doing online learning entirely, you're isolating them more because they're not making friends, they're not meeting people, and this just increases their isolation. Now, it's important to understand one of the things we found in this research is that, you know, many teachers and learners and administrators really were unsure of exactly what the potential was for this online learning. So they didn't really see these this potential for Skype, for using synchronous communication that now, I mean, we have access to these video conferencing tools, etc., like we're doing right now, where you can feel more connected. But there were still learners who were very digitally savvy, like very young adult learners who were saying that, yeah, I use technology all the time in my home life, but what I want in these classes is I want the ability to go out and meet and connect, because I will talk about jobs. I'll talk differently with learners in the face-to-face environment than I will in the online environment. So we still have that feeling among very digitally literate sort of learners, instructors, and administrators. You know, and the reasons why blended, I think, was so popular was this best of both worlds aspect, that, you know, I can have this autonomous, self-paced, flexible, and this individualized learning with this human sort of synchronous, same time sort of classroom interaction space. You know, and we had instructors say the blended is really advantageous because it can, you know, my students can be working on a project online together, and I can actually I can look around and really assess individuals on a more precise scale, because I have time to really look at what this student is doing, how this student is interacting, and I can give individualized feedback and help guide their learning a little better. So that was an interesting finding. The benefits that came out of blended learning, and this is out of the literature and also out of our research, was this flexibility in programming. Some of these spaces that we were giving, these community-based programs, really had difficulties and challenges reserving classroom space. And so blended learning, we had instructors saying, wow, now I can sort of work in two environments. I can we can use this classroom twice because we can have it used half the day for one class and half the day for another class, and they can do the rest of the learning online. So it gave this increased flexibility and this really space and financial savings that, administrators saw as key. And, one of the challenges with these face-to-face classes in these community-based programs that I'm sure you can relate to is really the challenge of scheduling for these new immigrants, newcomers, and individuals that have very busy lives and are trying to get work, trying to look after families, who may live in more rural environments that have to drive like 60 kilometers to a class that in winter doesn't make a lot of sense. So we saw it as this access to non-traditional learners, which was really advantageous, certainly through the ministry's eyes, but also through the administrators and learners. That it can allow me to go to these classes and learn more with a more flexible schedule. It also allows more individualized, more self-paced learning, as I spoke about. And some studies really do confirm that there are second language learning outcome benefits of blended learning because I'm working with language a bit more intensely, because I'm working with it in multimodal context with reading, speaking, and listening, and writing. And, so there have been some studies that have compared face-to-face distance and blended, and seen blended is really advantageous in language learning outcomes. And also what learners recognized and administrators and teachers in this research was the fact that, these digital literacies that students are working with, often they have that when they're coming in, but they're, working in collaborative environments online, and they're really enhancing their digital literacy that's transferable for workplace, environments and getting work in Ontario. So, it can help with integration. Some teachers talked about the, ability to enhance tracking and assessment, with blended learning, as I spoke of, because it gives us a bit of time to step back and see how our students are doing in these online spaces and also in the face-to-face class. And some instructors and administrators talked about the ability of online spaces to really centralize the learning materials. Any of you are doing portfolio-based systems or things, we have the ability to organize everything easily in one space. Well, maybe not easily, but at least in one online space that can allow us to sort of pull things quickly and not carry around huge amounts of binders and books that, I remember having to do in my earlier teaching career. But the challenges that arose in terms of blended was there was this lack of clarity with to what degree do I blend? Do I do 30% online, 70% face-to-face, or vice versa? Or do I do bookend, where I have face-to-face meetings at the beginning, at the end, and then the rest online, etc. So there was this lack of clarity in how do we actually operationalize this effectively. And how do I, many of these instructors had never taught online that we interviewed. And had not taken online courses. So how do I teach? I know how to teach in a class, but how do I teach online with these tools? And how do I blend, learn how to work with these blended environments? And how do I orient my learners to these blended language learning environments that many are unfamiliar with? And any of you who have worked in online sort of blended learning, know that it does often require a lot more time, and our workload increases, certainly at the beginning, and we often don't get compensated for that. So, that was a big constraint and barrier for these teachers talking about this. And many instructors, the majority said, I've had very little training, if any, in terms of online language teaching. And there's limited tech support in these environments. And how do I create this social presence and, create this pedagogical environment that's effective in these online blended spaces? So there were substantial challenges that arose that we can talk about later. We'll see illustrated in the example I'll share. But the interesting thing that arose in this research was this strong call for the human feel. And we had one student coin this term, the human feel, that I thought was very cool. And he said he was, sort of his early 20s, very digitally literate, and said, I like the idea of online learning, but we need to keep this human feel in the e-learning class. And another student said, and a number of students reiterated this, that the teacher is really important in motivating me and helping me learn. And they recognized that, online learning was limited if a teacher doesn't give me feedback. So this type of thing, so it was quite substantial, this finding, and there was really teachers, learners, and administrators saying that we can't just sort of load our textbooks or our lessons online. We really have to see how these online spaces can leverage different communication skills, different abilities. And, we really need to understand how we can potentially maximize the benefit from these different tools. And I've shared some quotes here. Nina Garrett did a sort of survey research on online language teaching in 2009. And she talks about, simply providing students with web links to authentic materials does not of itself constitute effective computer-assisted language learning. The real challenge is developing activities that will integrate authentic materials and engage students. So there's this need for engagement, interactivity, and connecting students with the learning in a meaningful way, like we do in class. And the TESOL technology standards, any of you are not familiar with this, the TESOL technology standards is really a useful tool. And it frames these standards on how to use technology in online sort of ESL teaching and blended language teaching. And they talk about the need for building social presence, that is at the heart of creating a learning community, as we know, we do in the face-to-face class, the same as for the online class. And we had students say, I'm not good on computers. I need the teacher's help in this e-learning environment. Most students have said, I've never learned languages online. And some have learned other stuff online, but very few. So the majority were used to the classroom environment. So again, for them, it's this transitioning that needs to be supported. And I'll just share this model that some of you may be familiar with, but I still find it pretty relevant, even though it's, over a decade old. But it's this community of inquiry model talking about how do we make online learning, and this wasn't to do with language learning, just online learning in general. How do we make it effective, and how do we make it engaging for students? And they talk about the need for developing 3 areas. They talk about the need for developing social presence, and we've talked about this, where individuals can share their identity and share who they are effectively so they see themselves represented in these environments. And we need to build this cognitive presence where individuals can work with content and work with material and other learners effectively in building knowledge together. And a key area in this is teaching presence, which I'll talk about in a moment. We as teachers need to have this presence in the environment. We can't be overwhelming because we don't want to shut down discussions, etc. So it's this nuanced approach that we need to use, but we need to model behavior, negotiate guidelines, and create this sense of us and sharing ourselves in the space as students do to some degree. And I'll show some examples from these sort of online teaching examples that I'll talk about in a moment. So teaching presence, one of these key areas that these researchers talked about, as teachers, we need to design and facilitate these cognitive and social processes to help realize personally meaningful learning outcomes for our students. And we do all the time when we teach face-to-face. But in the online space, we also need to do this, and we need to leverage the tools we have to do this effectively. And our role in the online space is a bit different than it is in the face-to-face environment. So we need to set up these structures and processes and this climate for effective learning and creating this community. And that can be quite challenging for those of us who've never done it before. And Potts did an interesting article in the Canadian Model Language Review that talked about some effective practices in online language teaching and learning. And she said how, a learner-centered instructor supported approach to learner-directed interaction is needed to sustain and deepen these online communities. So we need to really support these learners in these environments. We can't just set up the environments and let them go and presume everything will work. And Dornier has written an article, and all these references are at the end that you'll be able to see and I'll share with you. But Dornier did an interesting article on creating a motivating classroom environment in terms of language learning. And he wasn't really talking about online learning at all, but I really see it as very transferable to online learning. And he talks about the gelling force that keeps the group together is this social cohesion aspect. And he said this is built on like student acceptance and commitment to the group's tasks and the purpose and group pride. So it's building this group pride that we've all experienced in our classroom teaching, that you feel that energy from the class and the shared commitment to sort of common goals. And we need to do that in the online space also. And we have, the benefit of online tools is we have a lot of ability to share aspects of our identity, aspects that we may not share in as much detail in the face-to-face class. And what he said is a key factor in creating a motivating learning environment is this proximity and this contact and this interaction. So activities where group members learn about each other to foster group knowledge. And as you'll see in the examples I'll share, that in the online space was really created by synchronous, same-time interaction in these online spaces. I mean, it was also created to some degree by asynchronous narratives, because students could really share aspects of their identity that they may not share in the face-to-face class. So that can sort of help build this acceptance with each other. But what builds this proximity and interaction is this same-time communication in these online spaces, that we now have access to many tools that support this. So what I'm going to talk about now is I'm going to really talk about these examples. So this was a curriculum development team that worked with Colleges Ontario in transferring and building a number of online and blended occupation-specific language teaching programs for students in various colleges in Ontario. So these were college-level learners. They were high intermediate, advanced learners. And what this curriculum design team was asked to do was create 3 programs, one after another, and they came out, they didn't know everything they had to do at the beginning, obviously, as we can appreciate. They were told first to build a blended business program. So this was for business professionals, entrepreneurs, business administrators, managers, etc., from a whole range of occupational areas that link to business. And these were long courses. These were 180-hour credit courses. The other one was a blended interprofessional healthcare that was 140 hours, and this was for a very diverse range of healthcare practitioners, as nurse practitioners, physiotherapists, social workers. So you can see the diversity in the students you'd have in this class, but they all share they're within this umbrella of healthcare. And the final one they developed was a technology occupation-specific program for technology specialists, so web designers, sort of IT support workers, etc. And these were, this was a 180 course also, but offered completely at a distance. And the challenge with this is the goal was to work on speaking and listening skills mainly. And as any of you have taught, sort of newcomers and professional sort of individuals from who are trying to integrate it, understand that the challenge with speaking and listening, teaching that online completely, And this was done a couple of years ago now, this course design, was completely daunting by this curriculum development team, because they thought, wow, how can I work on a program that will develop speaking and listening skills exclusively online? So I'll walk you through these programs quickly, and we'll talk about what they learned, what these curriculum design individuals learned about these processes. So the blended business was the first program they developed, and what they did is they had a face-to-face curriculum, because this was already a program that was developed and implemented in the colleges in face-to-face classes. And what they did is they looked at that curriculum and they pulled activities and components that could work, that would cover about 30 to 40 hours of student work online. And they basically made it self-paced work, often done as sort of asynchronous activities, so on your own time activities and discussions. They did web searches. They did postings on a collaborative wiki. So it was very self-paced work. But what they found with the students was the students thought it was okay. But there were a number of students who said, you know what, it was okay, but it was just, I'd really rather do this in the class. So it felt a bit flat. And the curriculum lead on these projects said if she had stopped after developing this program, she probably would have thought that online tools or online curriculum isn't really an option for my future classes. But it was interesting because her opinion did change when they got into these other programs. The next one they did was a new program, and this didn't exist before, and the colleges asked for this program to be designed for blended delivery, and it was for the range of healthcare workers. It was designed from scratch, and so what the curriculum development team did was they looked at what are the outcomes that we're working with, and what tools and what delivery methods can face-to-face better meet these outcomes, or can online interaction meet these outcomes using varied tools. And they really built the curriculum from the ground up like that. So seeing how these tools can leverage different language learning abilities. And they created this program so it was 2/3 face-to-face, 1/3 online. And they really integrated a lot of collaborative multimodal online work, really with a strong teacher presence. They had teachers create these weekly video podcasts that they post on, they all use Moodle, I should say. They all use Moodle in these delivery systems, which is learning management system for organizing course content online. But these teachers posted these weekly video updates saying, this is the work we're going to be doing online. You may have challenges with this. These are strategies you can use, et cetera, et cetera. And they outlined the expectations explicitly for students. So students knew how much time they should be spending on each activity, what were the goals of this activity, how they could get feedback, et cetera. And they really did a range of different collaborative synchronous tools where students analyzed an online video and then had an asynchronous discussion. They use VoiceThread, which is an interactive presentation tool where students presented material and then students would interact with that material on their own and make comments with each other. And they did these Vocaru messages. Vocaru, those of you unfamiliar, is a web-based audio recording tool that's linked to a web link that you can use. And they had, they use that for having students practice voicemail messages, where students recorded a voicemail message and passed it on to another student. They worked in small groups, and they would copy the instructor on each of these emails they send, because what you can do with Vocaru, you record a message, you get a web link that you can embed in the email and then send it to someone that can listen to it and then respond to it. And so what this allowed teachers to do was it allowed them to really assess speaking and listening skills to the nth degree among their students, which was really useful for pronunciation and speaking feedback. And students were really thrilled with this online approach. They also had synchronous chats, and they worked a lot on project-based material where they had certain goals to accomplish within a certain time frame and had to often share these activities back with the face-to-face class. And what students really felt that they really got a lot out of it. And as you can see, this teacher who had, was very seasoned in ESL teaching, she said she felt she bonded more with this class than with any of her previous face-to-face classes. And the interesting thing about these programs that this curriculum team developed is they used teachers who had no previous online teaching or learning experience. So they were all new to this world of online or blended teaching. And this instructor, I've chatted with her since, and she said she adores teaching this course in a blended format because she really gets a lot out of it. She really connects with her students, and she finds her students really engaged because they really are working with language, very intensely, but, in a flexible manner. The final course that they developed was this distance technology, sort of English for specific purpose course. So this was, again, there was a face-to-face curriculum they used, but this was the third program that this curriculum team did. And they realized, what we have to really strategically use and develop this curriculum uniquely. So we need to see what the outcomes are and match the delivery method and tools with these learning outcomes. They did a lot of project-based and very multimodal interactive online work, understanding that we're working on speaking and listening skills, but we really need to make it interactive and make it same time so we can give feedback and students can really interact a lot face-to-face. So they interacted face-to-face online, and what they had was a lot of weekly video conferencing sessions. They started with a big video conferencing session as an introduction, and it was, I think, a 2-hour video conferencing session to introduce the course and have students share their introductions with each other and interact with each other. And there was a lot of actively checking in with learners, particularly at the beginning of the course, to make sure people were connected online. There were a lot of networking activities to connect learners. And this was also something that the instructor did in the healthcare project. There was a lot of front-loaded checking in. Are you getting online? Are you okay with these tools? Does this make sense? And what the instructor did with this distance technology pilot was that she'd never used a lot of these tools. So she tapped into the knowledge base of these tech professionals and saying, you know what, I'm having problems with using this tool. Can you give me a hand? So it sort of changed the teacher and learner role, where learners became instructors and support for the instructor in these environments that, people have written about as an effective way to interact with groups like this using technology, where our knowledge of these tools may be quite varied. There was a lot of small group work, and the instructor had weekly Google Plus Hangout office hours. So she had these hours each week, and students could sign up. And what she found was she was always booked, and she had students on waiting lists sometimes to see her. But students loved that one-on-one interaction they had with the instructor. And I should say these classes were about 15 to 18 students in each class, and the curriculum development team and the college environment said that, we can't really have more students than that. So that's one limitation of these. But the lead curriculum developer said that the learners were evangelical in their enthusiasm about this program. Some learners felt like all ES courses should be delivered like this. So students at the end of the course didn't want to stop. There were a couple that got jobs and had to leave the course early, one who had to move back to India and tried to keep it in the course, but had to leave because of the time difference constraints. So it really was a testament to really effective sort of model and approach. So I'll wrap up here by talking about some strategies to create teaching and social presence that have come through these examples and really sort of come out of the literature in this. And really it is this ability to exploit synchronous communication and these multimodal tools. And this need to check in and assess learner needs, and certainly at the beginning of the course to make sure individuals are sort of connected and feeling comfortable with the technology. And what one site did was they had a peer mentoring system where they had a weekly intake, and students would volunteer to be technology sort of online mentors to new students coming in. And that's one model that I think is really exciting, where students who may be more digitally savvy and more tech savvy can really help other learners in the process. These welcome videos are really seen as key in making me feel connected with the teacher, and it's a way for the teacher to share aspects of themselves, not just their teaching. There was the woman in the teacher in the healthcare sort of pilot class that was launched, and she talked about having her cat jump on the table in the middle of her webcast, and she'd leave it because it does show the me in the teaching that we all like to connect with, because that's often what we remember about our teachers, the human side of them, of us. So some instructors use the human image icons to show the me, and it really was this focus on learner-centered curriculum in these approaches. And this need to explicitly outline expectations and model and negotiate communicative practices. There were these activities that, asked for learners to share aspects of their experience, their identities. That was very cool. And often, I've had teaching online, I've had students share really profound aspects of their identity that we never knew about in the face-to-face class, that really connects them and shows what they've been through with other students. And that can become part of the learning material for the course. A lot of small group projects were in these courses that really worked. So this is where we can develop these common goals and this group pride, etc. And also encouraging this informal social connection. That's where the blended environments or these synchronous environments can be really helpful, because it really can connect us outside of the course. As I mentioned, these peer mentoring systems are really useful, that can really engage students in helping each other in these new online spaces. And, celebrating the successes really, and we had instructors in these courses that I just shared talk about in the face-to-face class what really worked online and what worked and how can we improve these other aspects. So really sort of affirming student experience in these. So, we had in one of the focus groups that we did in the research, in the ESL e-learning feasibility research, we had a number of instructors who had used online tools, and they took the course Learn IT to Teach, which is offered for link instructors, and really helps instructors. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it really helps instructors figure out how to learn to teach online and how to create learning objects, etc. And we had this one instructor who really took that. She got the certificate in the 4 levels of Learn IT to Teach, and she used her knowledge to really create a blended class in this community program where most teachers were teaching face to face. And, the administrator and the instructor shared that, she's had learners who don't want the course to end, who are very emotional when it ends. Well, I get to know my students more as people versus students in this environment. And this, was one of the sort of amazing phenomenon that I shared with the healthcare instructor, that really also said, I really prefer blended environments to face-to-face environments, because I get to know my students in more detail. So hopefully that shares some insight with you all. I know I've talked for a long time, and I'd be happy to answer and respond to any questions now. But hopefully that gives you some sense of what we've been finding in these online spaces and the need to create this human aspect. And what I've put here are some links to articles that we published in the TESOL Ontario Contact magazine. The first one is a link to the research project, which is a summary really of this ESL e-learning feasibility study that we did. And the next is a research article that I did for the research symposium at TESOL Ontario about the need for this human feel in online sort of ESL teaching. So you can look those up. They're free to read, easily accessible. And, if you have any questions now or after, please don't hesitate to send them to me. So thank you for your time, for listening. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Geoff. And we had a rich discussion here in the chat box while you were talking. I won't say there was a lot of questions, but we had some nice comments, and maybe I can voice them. So
Sure.
Patricia Parney says that this has been a rich part of our blended classes. The students come into agreement about how to do group project work online, regarding the instructions that we have to give the students and to figure out the means of communications and the rules of communications in blended and online learning. Ivana mentions that.
Right. So that, yeah, I mean, the need to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Patricia's talking about the need to really negotiate with students this group work and get their buy-in and get their understanding what can help, facilitate the way we conduct these group projects online. Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Tricia says that actually students do
Yeah,
this
students
themselves.
do them. Right, right. So yeah, having students really sort of take charge and really take the lead on this, that's great. Yeah, and I think that's that's ideal if we can do that. And I want to ask, I noticed Paul said some of favorite synchronous tools for communication online. I mean, one of the tools that I've used quite a bit of, I use Google Plus Hangouts, which I find useful because, I try to, we're always constrained with cost and with some of these tools you have to pay licensing fees for. So that's always a constraint in the environments where I'm working at York University. So Google Plus Hangouts I've used that in teacher education and with students and really quite enjoyed that. It does have its challenges, but it is, you can share documents and you can really interact. So I have used that pretty effectively. And I think some of the other tools that I've used in terms of synchronous communication, I've used because we use Moodle, we use the chat forum quite a bit. And that is something that I encourage students to do when we're doing significant work online. And students often sort of do these things. They're well-oriented. The students that I'm working with in undergraduate programs are well-oriented to synchronous communication tools, so they often have suggestions.
Sorry, Geoff,
Yes.
to interrupt you, but we have a bad breaking up. I had to turn your camera off.
Hey, Yelena,
Can you hear me? Hi, Geoff. Can you hear me?
yeah, I can.
If you can click on the headset icon and then rejoin the
I
meeting.
can, yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we have the echo sound and you're breaking up. Wait, I will unmute you. Let's
Can you
try
hear me
it
now?
now. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's much
Is that
better for
okay?
me now. Is that okay for everyone? Yes, another challenge of online learning.
Yeah, true. Another challenge of online learning completely. There are always tech issues. So it's always having those backup plans that are crucial. Or just being, sort of working with students to figure stuff out, which I've often done, which can be sort of fun in the long run, although stressful at the beginning. Any other questions or comments?
I had another question from Carol Falcorna. She asked about whether your research was done within different age groups of learners.
Yeah, so working with different age groups?
Yes, I think this was regarding the research that was done. Was it done on different age groups or? some particular age group?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. They were all, yeah, I mean, the research that I shared, certainly with the ESL e-learning feasibility study, was done all with adult learners. So these were learners who would have been in community-based ESL programs from a range of ages. I mean, from like 20 to, we had individuals in our focus groups who were probably in their late 60s also. So there were differences. There were some generational challenges, well, generational sort of comments that were made. Interestingly enough, and even the Eve Hack, who also is a prof at York, who I worked with on this research, and I felt, we had students sort of say, well, you guys don't use technology like we do. So it was interesting. There were sort of some ageist comments that came out, and there was one focus group where, we had learners in their early 20s sort of arguing with learners in their 40s, saying, I want more online teaching. The ones in their 40s and 50s saying, I really am comfortable more with the face-to-face class. So there was this, I'm not sure how pervasive it is, but there were instances of this generational digital divide that did come up, or presumptions about it. And maybe presumptions is a better way to put it, because we also had individuals who were in their 40s and 50s in these classes who really were very digitally literate. We had instructors who were, in sort of that older demographic who were really, really using online tools really effectively, whereas younger instructors did not. So, it was interesting, the gap. But I mean, a lot of has been talked about in research on that, but it really, I'm always critical of it to some degree, because I've seen examples where older individuals are really digitally literate and using tools effectively. But it is an interesting issue. But we didn't talk to teachers who were working with teenagers or younger students. It was all adult learners. And the examples I showed, again, that was a similar age range to the ESL learning. These were sort of college-based programs, so they were learners who were in their, again, 20s to 50s and 60s.
Thank you. We have some other comments from Patricia. I think I'll just voice them.
Yeah, the vulnerability comment, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Patricia. Yeah, because you talk about, sort of this idea of vulnerability. We feel a little more vulnerable online. And, I mean, the online spaces often encourage potentially individuals who may not speak up as much in class, face to face, to voice themselves online. It may be quite a challenge, or quite, making me feel more exposed. And also, when instructors talk about share some aspect of yourself, and you see a fellow student sharing a really detailed life experience with you, you may feel more pressure to share a serious life experience that, again, can bring up this vulnerability. And I think it's interesting, the emotional aspect and the affective dimension of these online spaces. And I think that's a whole exciting, potentially, enlightening area where, we do have this exposure to other people that is different, and it's static. Once we post our identities online, they're there for everyone to see, and they're written down. And some of the discussion tools that are in use, you can't edit them. So you put something up, it may have mistakes, or may have not really be what I want to say, and that can increase, I think, this vulnerability. But as you say, it does create this bond. And I think that's where we as instructors really need to mediate these discussions in these online spaces to make sure it's a safe environment. It is a very interesting area that you bring up.
Yes,
And Bar,
go
Bar
ahead.
brought up a question. What are your thoughts on having learning in a private space behind a login versus learning in open space? Yeah, And I think, I haven't looked in great detail in that, but I think that's, again, that ties into this affective differences, these emotional differences, and what we communicate with. I haven't really looked at that in detail, but you bring up a very interesting aspect, because I think it is these more private spaces. I've heard some instructors talking about doing journals with learners, where they write a journal and the instructor can look at it, or maybe just the learner keeps a private journal or blog that is not accessible to others. So I think there are those exciting tools. They offer different benefits and different dimensions. I haven't looked at them in detail, but I will now that you prompted it, because I think it's really cool and exciting.
Thank you so much, Geoff. We are running out of time, so I need to stop our discussion, but
Right.
the video recording and all the resources and the copy of the chat will be available on our website. And if there is anything that we missed, we will be happy to address. You have the email address of Geoff, and I think he won't mind if anyone would like to contact him regarding this presentation.
Yeah, for sure. By all means, send me any emails with more detailed questions. I'd be happy to respond. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks,
Have a great
Juliana,
weekend.
for facilitating this.